Hi everyone, Daljeet Peterson here from astrolab21.com. In this video we're going to be talking about Leo season 2022. And the theme of this video, I'm calling it Destiny Calling. And for a number of reasons. Most important which is that there's a major configuration going on during this month, during Leo season of 2022, and something which I've been talking about a lot in recent videos and over the course of the last, it's actually a culmination of the last 2 years. It's the Saturn-Uranus square, that cycle that has been really adding to the characteristic, to the tone and tenor, I believe, of the times that we've been living through recently. This square began in the spring of 2020 as we ushered in this unprecedented era of the coronavirus and the pandemic, and all that has come between then and now has been qualified in many ways by this Saturn-Uranus square. It's part of a much bigger cycle, a 45-year cycle that began for us back in 1988 and will continue until 2032. So we're in the last quarter of a longer 45-year cycle. And that part of that cycle, that squares aspect, is coming to an end over the course of the next couple months, this month and into the next. So that's why it's such a major configuration. It's something I referenced in a couple of previous videos. And I'll put links to those here in the description below and hopefully pop them up here. For those of you new to the channel, or if you miss these videos, it might be helpful to check those out as a reference to what's really happening now, because there's a lot of good information in there. One of which was my 2022 preview. I usually do a video for the year to come, the calendar year, and look at all the major astrological aspects. And one of the things I looked at in 2022 was, Mars was going to conjunct all the outer planets in succession over the course of this year, culminating with its conjunction with Uranus, which is happening this month. So that's a good one to look at. The other is a much longer and more in-depth video I did on the Saturn and Uranus cycle, which I called Clash of the Titans, Battle for the New World Order, or something to that effect. I know it must have been good because it elicited a warning sticker from YouTube. I think because I used the words New World Order in the title, and the algorithm went and looked at that and let everyone know that that's a conspiracy theory. Of course, it is also a line from a George Bush presidential address in 1990. So anyway, that's a really good video. I personally think probably one of the best ones I've done on the channel so far. A really in-depth look at, sort of world transits and what we can look at with this Saturn-Uranus cycle. And again, that's going to be culminating the square aspect, this last quarter square, what we call a crisis in consciousness in terms of the phasal relationship between the two planets. And that's where we are. We're in the midst of a crisis in consciousness, sort of worldwide right now. And it affects all of us, from the individual all the way up to the collective and global level. So we're all dealing with this crisis. All of us, each of us in our own ways, based on our own natal chart. Where do we have Saturn? Where do we have Uranus in our own charts is probably determining in many ways how we are handling this sort of unprecedented time we're living to. So got some charts to look at. I've got a presentation. We'll look at the map of the solar system, because there's some other things happening that I think are helpful to get that perspective on, including the start of a new Mercury phase that's also happening at the beginning of Leo season. So lots to get to here. So let's just jump in without further ado. I'm going to share my screen here. And as I've said, this is the topic here, Leo season 2022, Destiny Calling. And there's a lot of reasons why destiny is calling in this particular season, one of which is this Mars-Uranus conjunction along with the North Node in Taurus, which is a symbol to me of destiny. Anytime you have contacts with the North Node, we're talking about sort of the compass of our destiny, personal, individual, collective, community, and otherwise. And also Leo season. All of the fire signs are associated with a sense of destiny. So anytime we come into a fire season, whether it's Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius, there is a sense of destiny involved with these particular windows of opportunity that get presented during the annual solar cycle. So what's great about Leo season? Well, it means that the sun is moving through the sign of Leo for a month. And of course, Leo is the sign of the sun's rulership. So you can see the incredible symmetry here if you look at these graphics and some of the same concepts. And if we keep in mind that the planet itself is a function, right? It's representing all these functions of creativity, individuality, self-expression. And the sign itself, Leo, is the qualities of experience. So the qualities of creativity and will and enthusiasm and drama and authority, right? So there's this nice sort of overlay between these two energies, between the function of the sun and the quality of the sign which is moving through. So this is what gives Leo season its incredible potency. We've got a doubling of the effect of the sun's potent, expressive, authoritative, life force energy, the sense of power, right? The sense of purpose, being magnified and manifested by this wonderful experience of Leo, which is also of that enthusiastic and self-expressing and very dignified, dramatic, and creatively expressive type of energy. So this is what we're getting. Sun in Leo. This is the basis of Leo season. So it's a good time to really get in touch with your own personal ambitions, your own drives, your own creativity and self-expression, your own sense of inner authority. It's a great time to explore creative processes of any kind. It's also associated, rather negatively sometimes with being a little domineering or egocentric or self-centered. These are the sort of shadow qualities of Leo. And of course, they can also be present during a time when the sun's moving through Leo. If you are yourself a Leo sun, you're having your solar return this month, or a Leo rising, or even a Leo moon to that extent, you're also going to get a big boost of energy during this month. And anyone with a lot of fire in their charts tends to really rise to the occasion during a time like Leo season. So that being said, the other big thing that's happening in terms of this month is at the very beginning of the month, we're beginning a new part of the Mercury cycle. And here I'm in this graphic here of what's called sometimes the 4 faces of Mercury. This is a concept that I first discovered, I think it was Dane Rudyard's work, which has been since repeated by others. But there's this notion of there's actually 2 sides to the Mercury cycle, which is the Promethean phase and the Epimethean phase. And he names the first phase after the Greek god Prometheus, who stole fire from the sun. And this represents a time when the Mercury moves from being an evening star, it disappears for a period, and then rises again as the morning star, as if it has stolen the fire of the sun. So this was the reasoning for his naming of these 2 faces of Mercury. And so what you get is the first half of the phase, which begins with the inferior conjunction, which is a time when the sun and Mercury are in alignment, but the planet Mercury is between the Earth and the sun. Maybe I can just demonstrate this with our solar system model here. So what we're going to be coming to is a superior conjunction. And if I move this forward to, let's see. So if we take our perspective from here on Earth, what's happening is, why are we getting a conjunction? Well, we're looking at the sun, and Mercury is behind it, right? But from our perspective, our geocentric perspective here on Earth, they are in the same part of the sky. They're both appearing over here in the late degrees of Cancer. So this is what we would call the superior conjunction. And this is in contrast to what occurred for us earlier this year. If we go back to, I think it was around mid-May, back then was the inferior conjunction. What we had was, looking out, this would be the early degrees of Gemini at that time. But what we have is, here we have Mercury between the Earth and the Sun. And then that's the beginning of what would be called the Promethean phase. This is a time of great new energy. It's the seed of the cycle being planted. We get a lot of enthusiasm and energy and ideas. And now when we come to where we are now, which is 2 months later, essentially, we see that from our perspective and on Earth, Mercury has moved around to the other side of the sun. And here, this is the epimethean phase. And this is where, after having all of these insights over the last couple months, now we're getting a more sort of objective view of what was just a seed idea a few months ago. So this is really a good time to reflect on our mental processes, right? Whatever we were thinking about and doing back in May, any new ideas that came into fruition that have been developing over the course of the last, 4 to 6 weeks, now we're going to start to get a much more objective view on them, right? This is the nature of the Mercury cycle, right? The messenger god who is associated with our ideas, our inner dialogue, our languaging, our communication, right? So it's a good time to really reflect this month as we start to shift into this new cycle, right? And now Mercury is going from having been the morning star, now disappearing, and is going to reemerge over the next few weeks in the evening sky first. So it'll be the evening star. And that's just this epimethean phase. And if we look at just some of the qualities, right, we move from foresight to hindsight. We're going to start looking back a little more about what we've been thinking about and focused on, right? We're going from a more spontaneous and impulsive way of thinking into something much more calculated, careful, deliberate, right? We're going from a subjective sensibility to a more objective and analytical mindset. And of course, from new forms of creative expression here to knowledge from the past. We're much more likely to look to the past for clues on how we should move forward. The most recent past as well as longer time frames. It's just a tendency. And of course, it's also interesting to note when you were born. So we were all born either during one of these two phases, and it tends to dictate how we tend to approach the world from a mental, intellectual standpoint. Those of us who were born during a Promethean phase tend to be much more enthusiastic and a little more spontaneous about our mental thinking, our approaches to education, how we perceive and absorb information, versus those of us born in an Epithemian phase tend to be a little more conservative, a little more objective-minded. And I found this to be very true in the clients that I work with on a personal basis. So pretty interesting. So that's a good sort of start. This is happening in the few days leading up to the beginning of Leo season this year proper, like around the 16th or 17th of July. So wanted to start with that. The other thing that we're going to talk about here is going to be the Mars-Uranus conjunction, and everything's kind of leading up to that. Before we get into that, let's just jump over to the chart here for a second. And let's have a look at sort of a picture of the sky now. And I have it set here for the sun's enter into Leo on July 22nd. It's going to happen about 4 in the afternoon here on the East Coast. And we can see, by now, Mercury moving about 6 degrees past the sun. But if we had gone back a few days earlier, we would have seen here, it's actually on July 16th. At 24 degrees Cancer was the exact day of this superior conjunction, meaning that, the sun and Mercury were in direct alignment from here on Earth, looking at about 24 degrees of Cancer, but the planet Mercury is on the other side of the sun, superior conjunction. So we're entering in this epimethean phase, and as that's happening, both Mercury and the sun are moving from the sign of Cancer and into the sign of Leo. So there's this energy to this transformation and this period beginning for Mercury's phase. So it's also a good time to reflect on not just this sort of more objective sensibility, but also within the context of the sign of Leo. Again, that creative, self-expressive, authoritative type of quality. What are the things that you've been thinking about in terms of your own creative direction in life? Right? Good time and what seeds did you plant back in Gemini season, just a few short months ago, and what has culminated since? Where you're going to get some insights where those subjective hunches now become much more objective discernments. That's kind of the benefit of this period of the phase of Mercury. So that's very interesting and exciting. The next thing I think I want to point to that is going to trigger what I think is going to be one of the most substantial configurations of 2022. And as I said, kind of the culmination of something we've been in the influence of since March 2020, which was really when the world changed significantly for everyone on the planet, with the sort of outbreak of the coronavirus through all the, throughout the world, right? That's Saturn square Uranus. And we'll see it's coming back. It's already in effect here. If I were to show you what we're talking about, Saturn over here in Aquarius, we've got Uranus here in Taurus, they're in square. But what's happening is, as we move through here, and I want to go to the new moon in Leo here, which is going to take place on July 28th. Here we see the moon will conjunct the sun at about 5 degrees Leo and kick off a new lunation cycle. Leo new moon. Very powerfully configured and activated by what we can see here. It's not really so much about the position of the new moon, but Leo figures prominently in what is a very significant configuration, because what we have is what we would call a grand fixed square. And you can just see this big square emerging from all of these planets. You've got Mars, Uranus, and the North Node all in Taurus. They're in square to Saturn over here in Aquarius, which is in square to the South Node in Scorpio, which is in square to Mercury in Leo. And of course, those are in oppositional energy, those in our oppositional energy, those are in square. So this is a very intense, powerfully configured dynamic at play. Very dynamic configuration. Grand squares are always very powerful, usually result in a lot of energy being released in relationship to the nature of the planets that are involved in this square. So really quite a bit to break down in terms of what's going on with all of these energies. I mean, the first thing we want to consider is that it's a fixed square, which means all of the planets involved are in the fixed signs of the zodiac, which is Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. So all 4 fixed signs get involved in this configuration, which you think about the power of what the fixed mode is, right? It's really the harnessing of all of those energies, right? And what we get here is all 4 elements get involved in a square like this, right? Because Taurus is the fixed earth, you've got Leo, which is the fixed fire, Scorpio, which is the fixed water, and you've got Aquarius, which is the fixed air. And I always think about the fixed signs in any element tend to be the most powerful. They're sort of the harnessing of that energy, of that element. They pull it in and really harness it, right? Which is why, for instance, Scorpio, I think, is the most intense of the water signs. It's like a dynamo, right? Of it, all that emotional power. It really seeks to consolidate power on an emotional level, right, with the water element. Likewise, you can see, I think Leo is probably one of the most domineering of the fire signs. It's harnessing the power of fire, the passion, the energy, the creative enthusiasm. It really has command and control of that element. Similar with Taurus, fixed earth. Taurus, we think about, is really the most earthy of the signs in terms of capturing the element of earth. That sensuality, the procreative and reproductive power of earth. And I would say, Aquarius is maybe the most powerful of the air signs. It really has this very command and control position, right, with Aquarius in terms of its ability to be very objective and rational and scientific in its analysis of information, ideas, thinking, all the air elements. So all of this is coming to a head in this fixed square, and all of these planets now bring their functionality into these fixed signs. And we're getting some really intense, heavy energy here because of the planets involved, right? If you think about Mercury moving through the sign of Leo, right? This is a time of very independent-minded thinking, we're really we can be very self-centered. We can get lost in our own thoughts. We're really thinking about our own either creative powers or processes, or what we want to be doing in the world, how we want to be showing up, and just this process of self-discovery through our own creative purpose. So our minds are really focused on that. Well, this is coming into square or opposition, I should say, with the energy of Saturn and Uranus and Aquarius. Much different energy. Here we have the idea of limits. Saturn represents, of obligations to the other, to society, to our culture, to our community. Aquarius, to the future, to progress, right? So this dynamic can create tension. And usually oppositions, that tension tends to show up in our relationships with others, right? So here we could have this conflict between our own desire to be independent and have freedom to explore our own creative ideas and passions, our hobbies, our interests. We just want to do our thing, right? It's getting sort of controlled or compressed or contracted from this Saturn energy coming from Aquarius, saying, no, you have an obligation to do something bigger, for the bigger picture, for the greater good. That's what Saturn in Aquarius at its best can be. It can also feel like a burden, like an obligation. There could be limits placed on us from our culture, from our society, from our families, or from our relationships, whether they're career or personal or familial or otherwise, right? Limits. It could be suffering and loss from those relationships. So there's a conflict, right? And that needs to be resolved and worked out through that relationship. Then you get this other conflict here between the natural opposition of the nodal axis, which of course, if you follow this channel, I talk a lot about this year. Always interesting to watch the nodes as they shift. They tend to be our compass from past to future, right? From the spiritual to the material. It's how we manifest in a lot of ways. And we've been dealing with the nodes moving through the signs of Taurus and Scorpio respectively during this year. And now we're getting Mars and Uranus joining that north node over here in Taurus. And this is going to be the culmination of a very powerful configuration. In just a few days forward here, we'll see. But of course, these are also in square to these other two planets, right? With what we just talked about, Mercury and Saturn over here. So, and I think this is one we've been talking about more than any other, right? This square between Saturn and Uranus. Two energies that are, seemingly antithetical, right? You've got Saturn that wants to restrict and to limit and to build structures. You've got Uranus that wants to just explode and expand and generate freedom from Saturn's restrictions. So you think that these are sort of two antithetical forces, but actually they are working in a tandem in a way, and expand and contract. It's the way evolution happens. It's the way we grow and mature. So all of life sort of works at the pulse of these two cycles. But whenever they come into one of these hard aspects, there tends to be a lot of tension between those two energies and those two urges. One to expand and to express and be more freedom-loving, the other to compress, to contract, to restrict, to be more conservative and structure-oriented. And if we go, let me go back to my graphics here. I want to pull up, before we get to Mars, Uranus, and of course, like if you've been following again, we've been looking at Mars's conjunction with all the outer planets. But this is the Saturn-Uranus square. And if we think about, as I was just articulating, these two energies, right? Where on the one hand, you have Saturn, which is really focused on, like I said, structure and authority, limits, discipline. It's a contracting energy. It wants to create usable, valuable, three-dimensional structure. It's really the scaffolding of life is sort of supported by this archetypal energy that Saturn represents. Whereas Uranus is this opposite energy. It's liberating. It wants freedom from the known and the limits of Saturn. It wants to explore the unknown. It wants to be rebellious and revolutionary, and it can be very extreme in its nature. It can cause chaos and upheaval. It has this very sudden and eruptive energy, right? It's the nature of our intuition, I think of it as our own inner genius. It's the mad scientist of the zodiac, whereas Saturn is the father figure, the limiter, the taskmaster. So these two archetypes working seemingly at cross purposes, but really I think in tandem as the pulse of history in a lot of ways. Our own personal histories at an individual level, and our collective histories. You could look at them in terms of nations and empires, and really at a species level. The entire human species is being guided by these two archetypal principles. Now, we also can consider where they are in terms of their relationship to the signs they're in. So we're getting this liberating Uranian energy acting within the sign of Taurus. So all of these earthy, Venusian qualities that Taurus brings, a sense of the sensual and the sexual, the reproductive energy, the sense of value. This gets into areas of money and resources, food, water, actual currencies, the systems of the monetary systems, anything to do with survival. It has a very conservative quality to it. And then you have Saturn working through the energy of Aquarius, which is a very liberating, forward-thinking, scientific, humanitarian type of energy. And interestingly enough, Uranus is the natural ruler of Aquarius. So there's this sort of weird three-way dynamic that's been going on with this particular square energy that we've been dealing with for the last couple years. But really, this is the major theme. This is something that if we look into this graphic and the paradigm that's associated with these two planetary functions and these two signs and the qualities with which they bring, it really is giving us a good glimpse about some of the really major themes we've all been experiencing over the last couple years. One of the things that stands out from the most recent history, if we think about what's happened with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. What is this about? This is about reproductive rights. This is the domain of Taurus. Taurus rules reproduction, right? It's the feminine, it's the nurturing, it's the maternal, it's the sexual. So what's happening here? We're getting this overturning of what was a very liberated, forward-thinking decision several decades ago. Right? And where's it coming from? It's coming from Saturn. It's coming from the lawmakers, the rules and regulations, structure, restrictions on abortion, right? This is indicating of the kind of energy that this square is bringing up. And we could look into all of these archetypal configurations, and you can see all of the things that we're dealing with in the culture can be really boiled down and seem to percolate out of a lot of these concepts. The whole idea of Saturn and Aquarius I've been associating with the vaccine rollouts that have occurred over the course of the last couple years, right? You've got this very scientific, forward-thinking, progressive technology, Aquarius, being rolled out by governments and authorities. Saturn, there's a structure that there's limits to what you can and cannot do, whether you are vaccinated or not, right? All of these issues. The other thing that has come up with Uranus and Saturn has been a lot of political upheaval, right? We've got all of the great social movements that have occurred over the last couple of years. Very Aquarius, right? We talk about a rebellious sense of fellowship, this issues of equality, things like Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and some of the transgender issues that have come to the forefront. As well as, some of the more conservative, right? So you can see all of these elements at play if you really start to just sort of look at how these four archetypes interact. And when we're dealing with squares, it's conflict, right? There's something that needs to be worked out between those elements. There has to be compromise, right? There has to be a willingness, or one has to dominate the other. And I think you've probably been experiencing this in your own personal lives. Of course, this all is contingent for all of us as individuals. Where is our birth Saturn? Where is Uranus in our birth chart? Probably going to dictate in a great way how we're reacting to these transit energies, these world's transits that we're experiencing together now. But this is a major, major culmination point. And Again, I'm referencing some of like this slide, and some of the ones I want to show you are from the video I did on Saturn and Uranus last year, which I think is really worth, if you haven't seen it, worth reviewing. And so where are we at? We're at this last quarter square. As I said, this really started to come into effect in March of 2020. And it's had these 4 phases where it was within 5 degrees of orb. It was really an intense manifestation of this square energy. We had it through January and August of most of 2021 was under this configuration. In the beginning of 2022, and now here at the end of 2022, starting in July 24th, right here in Leo season, and lasting until September 10th. So we can think of this next sort of 5-6 weeks as being the culmination of this 2+ year process that's been going on in terms of this energy of this last quarter square between Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus, this fixed square. And you can just see some of the things that we've been dealing with here in terms of the coronavirus, as I mentioned, the social movements. We had the January 6th incident, vaccines and passports. And we're going to talk about January 6th, actually, because it happened during the Mars-Uranus conjunction under the influence of this square. And now we're going to have Mars-Uranus conjunct again in a few days. So interesting that we're actually dealing with the January 6th hearings during this time under this same energy pattern. And this is really one of the useful parts of astrology. It really, now we can use hindsight, right? This Epimethean quality of this time we're in with this Mercury phase to say, okay, what really happened? And astrology gives us these larger perspectives on the cycles of time. What was going on? What was that energy back in January 2021, right? Mars and Uranus together. And again, we can look at what that energy pattern presents. If I bring up this graph here, right? Whenever you combine the energies of Mars and Uranus, as we've had coming up now, and as we had at the beginning of January 2021, well, it's this electric yang enthusiasm. I just love that phrase, right? But these sudden breakthroughs, a sense of erotic emancipation. There's a lot of energy involved in this configuration. But it can also manifest on the shadow side as excessive self-will, reckless audacity, impulsive, rash decisions, right? Sudden military strikes. So looking at these qualities, and if you look at the events of January 6th, particularly these first 3, right? This was very much the shadow side of this configuration being constellated in that event, right? The excessive self-will of the president at that time, who wanted to essentially overturn the election and the results, right? Having a reckless audacity to instill essentially a riot, to get his followers to follow him and go and demand that they overturn the election. An impulsive, rash action, which really was very much what that event, in hindsight now, I think we can all agree, had these qualities of Mars and Uranus, right? There was this sense that this was a revolutionary, patriotic, it was another Tea Party type of event for those who believed fervently in what they were doing, right? But they were getting influenced by this configuration. And so now we have to be aware that this energy is presenting itself once again during the course of this month. So all of these energies are being reactivated with this part of the square. And I think in a way possibly more intense or as intense as it was during that January 2021 period, because now we have even more pieces of this puzzle. Of course, we have the wisdom of hindsight to say, okay, we know what this energy feels like. We know how it's constellating during our current situation. How are we going to use this energy in a more wise and enlightened way, right? Can we tap more of the positive sides of this configuration and avoid some of the shadow compulsions, right? Can we get something that's much more courageous and enthusiastic, right? Can we have some kind of sudden breakthroughs, be it in any of the areas we talked about, whether it's in the Aquarian energies or the Taurus energies, right? Earth and resources, authority, progressive ideas, scientific revolutions and breakthroughs. All of these things are constellated, but you never know. And each as individuals, we all bring our free will to this process. We are a collection of individuals as a nation, as a global population, as a species. All of these things are working out at many levels. But our astrology gives us a way of getting a perspective on all these things that are going on. So, I want to say, I think between July 28th, where this grand cross gets triggered, simultaneously with the Leo new moon. This is a powerful time for setting intentions for our own creative authority, I think. Anything Leo related and the mental aspect that this Mercury is bringing. Really great time for that. But to be careful of are more egocentric or stubborn or arrogance, right? If those shadow sides of the Leo configuration get presented, they are going to come into conflict with particularly this, Saturn Aquarius. You could see a lot of situations where you are getting into like mortal combat with those that you intellectually disagree with in terms of their own social values, identity politics, things of that nature. And we're seeing that playing out. It's been playing out for the last 2 years, but things have really come to a head, I think, with the recent decision to overturn Roe Wade, the reaction now from the political left versus the political right. It's a very tense time. And one of the things I think this square is bringing into aspect is the idea of reproductive rights is very much at the forefront. And Mars here is interesting with Uranus. I think this symbolizes sort of the animus of the feminine and maybe the women's movement, right? This idea from Jung that for every man they have the anima, the inner female. Every woman has the animus, the inner male. And I feel like this is a chance to tap into that sort of the divine feminine empowered by the animus, where the goddess energy really gets energized. And in unique, sudden, progressive breakthrough ways, Uranian ways, right? Can be a very explosive time. But it's dealing with limits from Saturn in Aquarius, right? This whole societal, authoritative limits, structures. And I think Saturn in Aquarius has really shown itself to be, to really be manifesting some of the sort of more conservative, fixed, narrow-minded sides of Aquarius. We've gotten down some scientific blind spots. I think we've been less progressive in a lot of ways. And I think we could expect that. Saturn tends to amplify the more conservative aspects of any sign that it's moving through. So we're seeing a lot of that sort of Saturn's willingness to go backward. It wants tradition. It wants the old school, right? And it shows up in, if I can find here, the Saturn-Uranus clashes that we can see. And the shadow qualities of this, I think, are showing up. Tensions between past and future, right? It's exactly what's being constellated in this decision, in this big cultural sort of conflict and argument and discussions that we're having right now, right? This is a tension between past and future. Those who want to go back to very old traditional values, those who want to move into more progressive, forward-thinking, liberal values. We're getting sudden shocks and rude awakenings. And I think for a lot of people, this decision, even though it was leaked, so we kind of got a little bit of a heads up on it, but still, when the decision actually came down, I think there was a lot of shock that this was overturned. And it was a rude awakening for a lot of people that things have changed politically in this country. And I think Saturn in Aquarius is showing us, I think the Supreme Court sort of has that quality of Saturn in Aquarius, right? This ruling, this authority, they are the judges and the jury on this. And so that aspect is showing itself really quite significantly, I think. This idea of hyper-responsibility and hyper-vigilance. I mean, if nothing else, that is the signature of the entire pandemic period through which we've had this square in effect. So, irresponsible, harmful rebellion. There's your January 6th movement. The negative side of modern science and technology, the whole issue over vaccines and mandates and anti-vaxxers and pro-vaxxers, right? Endless compromise and generation gaps. And I think we're seeing that too play out in many ways. So a lot of these themes are being archetypally configured into this really powerful constellation of all of these planetary energies. And so this is triggering, so look out. Does this mean that on July 28th all hell's going to break loose? No, but it means it's a culmination of that energy, and this pattern is prevalent and it needs to be worked out. Things are going to happen within these areas. Now we can't be concretely predictive, as I always say, right? Astrology is not concretely predictive, it is archetypally predictive. So we can say things within this archetypal complex are going to manifest. I think you can be fairly certain of that. What it's going to be, we don't know. Now, if we move our chart here ahead just to a few days later, so August 1st, and if we can see here, here we're getting the exact conjunction of the North Node, Mars, and Uranus here at 18 degrees of Taurus. So this feels like, when I talk about destiny calling, this is the sort of the sign that I was thinking about when I gave the title of this video, because that's what it feels like. Anytime you get a conjunction or an aspect with the North Node, it's kind of the current destiny of our collective in terms of the world transits. We're moving into, and I've been talking about this in previous videos, this moving from Scorpio in the past, this emotional, the relationships that we have, the entanglements, the sort of depth, all those things that Scorpio represents in terms of that watery, Mercury underworld, very plutonic type of things, the sort of libidinal, underground, obsessive, compulsive type of energy. It's trying to be pulled out into a more earthy, embodied sensibility. We're trying to grow through this dynamic, past to future, right? And embody something a lot more healthy. What we're trying to do is heal the wounds of the past, those emotional baggage, come out of the shadow into the light, and embody and download, really be present in the world in a much more earth-centered, grounded way. Taurus, practical, sensual, sexual, potent, creative, artistic, Venusian, right? Loving, kind, caring, divine. And having this energy there, Mars and Uranus, really is just giving us an incredible, almost tinderbox for that dynamic to play out. So incredible, all these square configurations always present incredible opportunities. It's what we do with these energy patterns that makes all the difference. And as I show, you can always see the sort of light and dark, or the shadow side of each of these configurations is ever present. It's always configured. This is the nature of the archetypal reality, I think, with which we are living in. So here we're going to have an opportunity to really do something transformational, revolutionary, breakthrough in terms of our relationships to our bodies, to our physical health, to our connection to the earth. Things like environmental issues, very much at the forefront with this configuration. Revolutionary breakthroughs in earth sciences, in resource management. This could be a very interesting time period for financial markets, because Taurus rules finance, it rules money and the banking system. So this square, and I've talked about this in previous videos, that it feels like this is the culmination as well of 2 years of very unprecedented monetary policy between like the Fed and all of the central banks of all of the industrialized nations, the massive amount of money printing that's gone on during this 2-year period, right? So government's authority, right? Saturn, Aquarius, over revolutionary money products, Uranus and Taurus. We've seen what's happened to the crypto world in the past couple months. It's just gotten hammered. all of these things may be coming to a head. There could be some massive breakthroughs in terms of value, money, resources as this period comes to an end. And what we're really setting ourselves up for now is another 10-year phase, right? We're coming into the last quarter of what, as I said, is a 45-year cycle from 1988 to 2032, right? We're in this historical cycle. And what happens in this 2-year period is really going to set the stage for how this cycle culminates over the next decade, which is, I think, going to be a massive change that's going to take place. It's, if you look at what we've had historically here, here's kind of a way of tracing out this sort of 45-year, or to this point, 35 years, right? What began in 88 with President George Herbert Walker Bush talking about a new world order, right? It was the beginning of a global expansion. It took place in the sign of Sagittarius, this conjunction, right? Global, big world ambitions. And we got into globalism, and we developed the beginnings of the internet, this first global telecommunications technology. Issues came up in terms of NAFTA and free trade, right? This was all the energy of the last conjunction of Saturn and Uranus in the beginning of a new cycle. Then we got the square around 99 to 2000, 2001, and we had the dot-com bubble and the Enron disaster. We had 9/11 and the beginning of the war on terror, right? All constellating these conflicts. And then we had the opposition, 2008, 2009, 2010, right around there, right? The Great Recession and the collapse of the financial institutions, the Arab Spring, the Occupy Wall Street, the beginnings of the Tea Party movement and what developed and then came manifest, I think, in the next quarter square with things like QAnon and all of these alt-right types of movements. We had the coronavirus and, of course, all the social movements, vaccines. So what is this next row going to look like, right? Where are we moving towards? What will be the big sort of 4 pieces that we would fill this out as the completion of this cycle and, of course, the beginning of a new cycle, right? Where are we there? This is sort of a look at it where we started in Sagittarius. It's interesting, this inversion, that when we had the square in the 2000 period, you had Uranus in Aquarius and Saturn in Taurus. And now as we go as the last quarter square, they've switched signs, which is very interesting. And I think you may see some sort of resonance or reversals of those things that we went through right there in the new millennium, right? The dot-com collapse. I think you're seeing a lot of that, echoes of that with what's going on in cryptocurrency right now, all the tech stocks. There's going to be a complete revaluation, right? We're talking about Taurus here, and I think here it's going to be a way more innovative and something very sudden and different is about to emerge within that field. But yeah, essentially that's what I wanted to get to with this video. Sorry if it was a little long, but it's just, like I said, this is one of the bigger, more significant configurations that is going to occur during this calendar year of 2022. This was actually the ending of my 2022 forecast video was right here, August 1st. I felt like this was probably going to be as prominent of a configuration as we're going to see throughout this year, which has already been quite eventful, right? And this whole Mars conjoining with all of the outer planets, it began, as I said in that video, it's going to start with its conjunction of Pluto in late February, early March, which it did, exactly coincided with the outbreak of the war in the Ukraine, right? And it's just to a T, those configurations were manifested. And so now as it culminates with this conjunction with Uranus and this much more eruptive, rebellious activity, but having to have that square with Saturn and this grand cross going on and getting the nodal axis involved, I just feel like this is a massive time for something very sort of paradigm shifting to unfold. And again, doesn't mean that on August 1st, we're going to wake up to a brand new world, but there's something that's shifting in the consciousness and in the collective and in each one of us that's waiting to be born, that's waiting to emerge. So if you've been in a process in your own personal journey where you've been working on something of a transformative nature, anything that's moving you into a more embodied sense of self, is really moving along with this energy. You're swimming with the current, if you will. If you're dealing with things of an emotional past, of dramas and problems and issues that you've been dealing with that are holding you back emotionally, this is a great time to be healing those, to be doing the therapeutic work, to bring the shadow up into the light so that those can be released, the repressed feelings can be dealt with and released, and so that you can start anew and afresh and move in the new direction that's being offered at this time. Because I really feel like we are in its brave new world, right? And it's up to us, each, I think, individually, to determine what is that world we're creating. What world are we creating for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our family, for our friends, within our community, within our nation, and as global citizens? How are we showing up? Really be really conscious and aware of that during this Leo season, because it's a time of great opportunity, but also a time of great peril, right? These energies can go either way. It's like, you're grabbing the third rail, if you will. So be careful and be powerful, be conscious, be full of love and light, because that's what it's going to take to get through all this stuff. So, all right, hope that's been helpful. Again, check out the other videos if you haven't seen them already. It'll give you a lot more context to the time that we're moving through right now. And as always, if you find these videos helpful, would appreciate it if you click the like button and also subscribe to the channel so you get notifications about when other videos are coming out. So that said, good luck, happy Leo season, and we'll see you next time.